today is hopefully something that I can do for you. So the purpose of today is to talk about careers. Some of you are first year JD students or first year LLM, some of you are final year. The format for today will be that there are things that I have been asked as Dean for many years that I'd like to distill up front and share with you. And then you've had an opportunity to send through some questions. There are many great questions, but I won't be able to deal with all of them today. But we'll deal with some of them in the second phase, and in the third phase I'll throw it open to a general Q&A. What is my justification or right to be able to talk to you about multiple legal careers? Well, apart from everything I do as Dean that puts in place the support and guidance available to you, teaching and otherwise, I also have had multiple careers. I am the longest serving Monash Law Dean, but before that, and sometimes during that, I've had other careers. And as the Dean, I speak regularly to those who employ our graduates. And so I hear lots of things from lots of people, both in the legal profession and there within various arms of the legal profession, and from other non-legal employers about what they're expecting, what their experience has been of our graduates. So I want to, in these last couple of weeks that I have as Dean, before I step down after 11 years as the longest serving Dean at Monash Law and currently the longest serving Dean amongst the Deans in the country, I want to share the benefit of that experience with you and try to distill it. So to give you a sense of the kinds of careers, mine is not the only way you could follow, but I have been a student, I have done postgraduate study. Some of you have asked me questions in the questions on notice about doing further study. I did work as a judge's associate, which is something that JD and undergraduate students often ask about, and that's in the questions as well. I spent time overseas, I came back, I got admitted as a barrister before I left to maintain my seniority, thought I was going to be a barrister, and then various personal and professional circumstances changed when I came back from Oxford, having finished my doctorate, and I ended up being a senior associate in a law firm, and then a consultant to that law firm when I decided I wasn't quite finished with academia yet, and I wanted to have a mix of both practical and academic aspects in my career. And I stayed that way for about 20 years before I became Dean. And then when I became Dean in 2013, I realised, first of all, that's a full-time job, and trust me, it is a full-time job. And I had to be at arm's length from a law firm, so I cut off ties with the international law firm for whom I had worked full-time and was a consultant, so that I could be a full-time Dean. And along the way, I've also, as you've heard, been appointed to a national government expert panel of 3 members, which has had an impact on an important part of business regulation. So there's a couple of themes there I would draw out for you, whatever stage you're at, which is, first of all, some people are lucky enough to have in mind that they know what they want to do, and some of you might have come here as a JD or LLM student, you know exactly what you want to do, whether it's a change of career or a new career, and it's all a linear progression to what you want to do. And I have some friends who always wanted to be a law firm partner, for example, or always wanted to be a commercial silk and then a judge, and that's exactly what they've done. But you know, and I know, that most of us aren't that fortunate to be able to sort of just do a linear vertical career path, and indeed there are so many opportunities available now, and sometimes what you think you want doesn't turn out to be what you want at all. And so it's important that we talk about other pathways, but also that we recognise that it can be a bit of serendipity to this, and that it's okay to be changing. But what you want method in the madness. Taking advantage of opportunities and preparing for opportunities is okay. It doesn't all have to be linear. It can go to the side and then up and then back again and then up, so long as there is a systematic rationale for what you're doing. And indeed, every job you have, once you go for another one, they're going to look at where you've come from and how often you shift. I've just done that myself in a selection process where we're recruiting new academic staff, and I've looked at, well, this person doesn't seem to stay anywhere very long. And they will say the same things about you if you are all about you and just too quickly moving on. The great thing about doing a JD or an LLM, if you're using it for career purposes, is you're still, even if you've had another career, you're still at the early stages. And so you get to experience different things and work out what it is that you're going to do with your law degree. One of the things I can share with you is that when I go out and speak to various employers, they use different language, but there's sort of a couple of themes that come through. And so you've chosen Monash Law, and I want to affirm for you some of the things I hear from employers that make that a good choice. First of all, they look at what they perceive to be the entry score when you come in. They know that to get into Monash Law in our various degrees, we're only taking meritorious candidates at a certain level. Not every law school is taking people at that level. So that's the first indication they have. The second indication is they work with us, they partner with us, they're often sponsors or donors, they may be alumni, they may not, they may have taken graduates from here for many years. So they've got 60 years now of taking the Monash graduate as an employee, whether it's a judge's associate first year out or in a law firm or somewhere else. And so they trust and value the value add that you get that they know is here from the Monash experience. The third aspect is they trust the integrity of our marks, and they know that if you get, and our processes, they know that if you come out with a certain score, they can trust that. And so those three things together, your scores coming in, the value add while you're here, and the grades you get at the end, are what they can look at. It's not the only thing they look at, but what they can look at to assess, is this a good candidate relative to other candidates from other places? It is a competitive marketplace because there are 8 law schools in Victoria. Per head of population, there are more law schools than in America per head of population. And so it is competitive, but you have advantages in doing a JD or an LLM and in doing it here, and then taking advantage of the other experiences while you are here. The other aspect that often comes through is, and again, some of the questions I've been asked are about, well, how do I prepare for an interview and what are they looking for, and how do I sort of get ahead there? Again, one of the things that I've noticed, and it comes up in my discussions with them, and also they say it in different ways, but it basically boils down to the same thing. There are 4 themes that come through in what they're looking for as employers, and this would be the same whether you're talking about law firms or accounting firms or government departments or others. And I would distill those 4 things as being, and think about this, you've got a small number of human beings, let's pick a law firm, say, as a potential employer, whether it's graduate positions or clerkships or lateral transfers or whatever. Limited number of people in a limited time frame are looking at a number of applications. And so there's got to be something there that makes you stand out. And remember, if you just say the same stock standard things to every firm you're applying to or every employer, they've heard it all before. And if you don't show that you've, in your application, taken the time to customise a bespoke application to why them and why should they pick you, then they'll just say, oh, well, this is just generic, they're just applying everywhere. So you need to think about it from their perspective as well. And it's a human being. And you might think that you've got a CV and that there's gold there and the application letter's gold and you've spent a lot of time passing every word, but they're going to be reading it quickly and they're looking for something to stand out and they're looking for something that's different. And so I would summarise the 4 things that they're looking for as why should they pick you out of all the others that they've got? Now remember, we're not talking about interview yet, we're talking about if you're writing to them and applying, they haven't seen you yet. They haven't experienced you. You're not having this live interaction. It's based on the words so far. So why should they pick you on paper? Why did you pick them rather than all the other potential places you could have applied to? Thirdly, are you a good fit? Organisational fit between the individual and the organisation is really important. And then fourthly, will you stay? Because they're used to a generation of people who are grabbing credentials and experiences because it's all about them and then moving on. And they know that it takes time to invest in you and to get a return from that investment. And so those are the 4 things. Why pick you? Why have you picked them? Are you a good fit? And will you stay? And your application has to help them see that and see it clearly. If you make them work too hard on the application, they're liable to go, sorry, put that one aside. That brings me to the importance of academic grades and that it's not just about grades. There's no two way around it. Getting the highest grades of which you are capable is not only helping you to become the best academic and student you can be and to show you at your best, but of course that's important, and the higher your grades, the more you've created more opportunities for the kinds of places that you want to apply, because some of them will look at the higher grades versus not so high grades. But it's not just about grades. Getting good academic scores in your course is a necessary but not sufficient condition to get interviewed and to get good jobs. Why? Because once you're out there, you're in client land. And part of the organisational fit question is they're not employing just a book-learned person. They're looking for a well-rounded person who, from the application and from the CV, they can see is book-learned, so book smart, street smart, tech smart, world smart, people smart, IT smart, AI smart. No one's going to be at the top on all of those things. But they're looking for different kinds of smarts, because you've got to interact with people, you've got to work with a team, and you've got to work with clients. And so they've got to be able to assess that from the application, and then they're affirming that or testing that or probing that if you get to an interview. So marks are a necessary but not sufficient condition. And so the kinds of other things other than marks they're looking for are things that you can pursue and develop while you are at law school. Because there's a lot of things you do while you are here in the classroom, in the student organisations, in extracurricular activities, getting involved in things that demonstrate that you've got transferable skills and experiences. That can demonstrate, for example, that you can do a number of things at once, you can keep a number of plates spinning in the air, that you can persist, that you can work nicely with others, that you can lead things, that you can project management, that you can deal with people, and that when there's a problem or a crisis, you're not going to fold. So if you think about it, there are a number of things in your life experience and also in other work experience. Many of our JD and LLM students have other work experiences that show they have those skills and experiences that can be translated into a law firm environment. You may not have had a legal career. You may not have worked as a paralegal. You may not even have got a clerkship. But you may have other work-related experiences that show that you would be a good fit and that you have all those other smarts that they're talking about. These are things for you to be thinking about when you are going to networking events in the lead up to clerkships or in the lead up to when law firms and other employers put things on. To think about because of the questions you might get asked, even ad hoc, or to think about when you are preparing a formal application. There are a number of things you should be pursuing while you are here. And that's why it's important to have what might be called a sort of a smart or strategic approach to career planning. And there are various ways to express that. But when I've talked to cohorts of students over time, I've said, there's no two ways about it. You've got to get the good grades. If you don't get the good grades, then why are you here? And by good grades, I mean the best grades of which you are capable. So if you've had I spoke to a student the other day who was a bit down about having not performed as well. I mean, they did more than pass, but they didn't perform as well as they wanted. And so I said, well, have you gone and got some feedback? And we talked through the process of getting the various forms of feedback so they could course correct and move on. Students sometimes angst a lot about, well, do I need HDs and only HDs? Do I need a distinction average? Yes, of course, there are certain kinds of employers that will be notionally doing some kind of cut-off and only looking at people with a certain WAM or a certain GPA. But even there, that's not enough. And they do look at the holistic person, and they are looking at relative opportunity. They are looking at broadening their own profiles and diversity. So all of these factors are in play now in the modern world of recruitment. One way that I talk about it with potential applicants for jobs from a law school perspective is to talk about a rolling 5-year plan. So if you're a JD student, then if you're here for 3 years, your rolling 5-year plan is about how you maximise what you're doing here And then what's going to happen in the first few years out? And if you're a final year JD student, it's about what happens the next 4 years. You may or may not get to your preferred employer. But as I say to the undergraduates, just because you don't get the particular job that you wanted with the particular organisation doesn't mean career is over. I can give you any number of stories where somebody who, for whatever reason, didn't get that job and then became an absolute star at another firm or another organisation, so much so that later, I've got a good friend of mine who's now a partner at a major law firm and is just fantastic. He couldn't get interviewed at one of the firms that I also was associated with. I don't know why he couldn't get interviewed. Sometimes mistakes happen. But he's an absolutely spectacular law firm partner doing as well as anybody can. And he and others were then approached and poached. So if you work hard and get somewhere, your aim is to then become the person who at that organisation is the go-to person. Who's the best first year graduate or the second year graduate when you've got a matter where you really need someone who's good? You want to be that person. And then you can laterally transfer. If that's what you want to do, you can laterally transfer. I've got a former research assistant who started with a mid-tier firm, which also took our Supreme Court Prize winner. So, big law firms are great, but they're not the only places that offer great employment. And the thing that some students sometimes forget is, even if there's a big law firm on the other side, on one side, there's got to be another lawyer on the other side, which could be from a boutique firm or a mid-tier firm or a smaller firm. And that lawyer is up against just one lawyer. That one lawyer might be at the same peer level, and they might come from a big law firm which supposedly has all these resources and everyone involved, but when push comes to shove, it's just one lawyer against another. And the lawyer from the smaller firm might often be given more responsibility because the other lawyer is just, doing a lot of other stuff. So revisit preconceptions and assumptions you might have about any of this. Similarly, I worked for a big law firm, full-time and part-time, for more than 20 years. And there are lots of partners in law firms who are doing great work through law societies, and if they're at the bar, through the committees of the bar works, where they do fantastic stuff and commit a lot of their time to pro bono work and access to justice and law reform. So just because you work at a big law firm doesn't mean you don't get exposure to opportunities to be able to exercise your social conscience. And just because you work in a community legal centre doesn't mean that's the only way in which you can be committed to social justice. So again, drop assumptions, drop preconceptions, leave them at the door, triangulate and get information. Use your networks. Part of the networks you have available to you are to start, for example, with the LSS. The LSS and the faculty, sometimes together, sometimes separately, run a whole range of career-related events and produce a whole range of career guides. As Dean, I get asked to write forwards to all of these things. So do your desktop research, starting with the links available to you and the guidance available to you, whether it's through the student administrative services and the administrative staff you contact here who can direct you towards where do I find about careers, whether it's LSS networking and LSS events and LSS career guides. And they produce a number of tools. Some are on our website, some are podcasts about careers. There's a range of desktop research things you can do starting with your own law school and network building starting with your own law school. We have any endless number of opportunities to create contacts between students and the bar. The open justice, I was about to call it something else that would have increased the numbers from the bar. I was about to call it the open bar scheme, but which would have got a lot of people, but it's open justice, which puts together Monash law students in a volunteering sense with members of the bar who are doing pro bono work. There are women's bar mentoring schemes. There are any number of other ways where you can get involved with the young lawyers side of the Law Institute of Victoria or the bar committees, the younger lawyers. There are any number of entry points. But you have to do some research, desktop research about it, and you have to be open to the possibility, and you have to start getting the information from within this law school and creating the networks from within this law school. And they may need to be bespoke for you, but you are in charge of a smart career plan. And part of a 5-year career plan that I urge you to start developing once you leave here today, whatever stage of your degree you're at, part of that is to think through, what can I do now? Where will I put my time while I'm here to get all of those transferable skills and experiences that the Dean talked about, as well as get as good grades as I can? And tunnel vision can be an enemy, and many students focus so much on the marks side and then over-worry about that. It's okay to have constructive angst. If you're not passing, then your chances of, or you're just getting passes, your chances of getting certain jobs will narrow. And it is right to constructively angst about how might you improve, so that you maximise your chances of getting the best grades of which you are capable, and also increase the pool of job opportunities. But there's a lot of unconstructive angst that students have as well. And my advice is to try to work out what's the difference between constructive and unconstructive angst, and spend time only on constructive angst. And the things that are worthwhile are worth angsting about. You should spend time working out how the job letter to each prospective employer is going to go, and you should work out a number of drafts, and you should show it to someone else that you trust and get their reaction to it, because you're just inside your own head. And you should take advice from others, but you need to triangulate it as well. And just because someone says something, it may or may not be true, it may or may not reflect just one person's experience, it doesn't mean it's truth at large. So we are all, as part of developing a smart career navigation plan, we have to take charge of it ourselves and be responsible in triangulating and listening and taking advice, but in the end deciding for ourselves. The last thing I was going to say was about career choice flowcharting. Some people know what they want to do. Some people are still open to, am I going to be a lawyer, or am I going to use my degree for something else? In one sense, you just flowchart it and then work it through. And you're either going to use your law degree in the legal profession, or you're going to use it for some other career. And if it's in the legal profession, are you going to be in the public sector as a government lawyer or a regulator? Are you going to start off as a judge's associate? Or are you going to be in the private sector? If so, with what kind of law firm? Are you aiming to go to the bar? So what's the best way to get to the bar? Do you go straight to the bar, or should you get some time and experience and contacts and money and mentorship while working with a law firm for a couple of years? If so, in what kind of areas of law? Down the track, you might think that what you want to do is to be in a certain area of law, but until you've had an experience of it, either as a paralegal or through clerkships, or having tried it for real, you don't really know if you want to be in that until you've tried it. So for example, when I came back from Oxford, I had a doctorate. My doctorate was in legal reasoning and legal theory. At the end of the first week, the partner that I was working for took me into the boardroom with all the other partners for drinks and said, "What was your title of your thesis, Bryan?" And I gave them literally the 20-word title, which was Resources and Limits of Judicial Reasoning, with particular reference to decisions of the Australian High Court to overrule its own previous decisions. And there was stunned silence, and then this sort of voice from the back went, "Doesn't sound very bankable." And I was in the banking and finance section in my first job straight from Oxford, having done a doctorate. And if you'd asked me, would you have, and I was just put there. I got a job, but I was just put there. If you'd asked me, I would have said, I can't think of anything worse, apart from tax. I can't stand being in tax, but every transaction has tax consequences, whether you're in family law or commercial law. So I had to get used to asking the tax people. But if you'd asked me, do you want to be in banking and finance, I would have said, I couldn't think of anything worse. So my preconception, ill-informed, but having talked to a number of people, was I don't want to be in banking and finance, and here I'm going to be there for a year. By the end of it, I loved it, because what I didn't know until I got there was that banking and finance throws up all sorts of interesting legal issues across a whole range of areas of law. Corporations law, equity, property, trusts, commercial law, agency, litigation. We did our own litigation. Fantastic. So again, you may be lucky and you think you want to do something as an area of law or even as a particular career, and you might be right, but you just don't know until you try it, and you've got to be open to opportunities. If you'd asked me 20 years ago, do you want to be Dean? I would have said, no way. In fact, I ran away from one place where it was a case of, last person standing, they'll be Dean, because I didn't want that. But then things change. So you need to be open to possibilities, even now. And you need to try some things, and you need to accept that, especially for a younger generation. I realise not everybody doing a JD and an LLM is in the younger generation. But you're liable to still have more career changes than anything. And so it's not necessarily going to be a linear career. And what you're gathering is you're gathering experiences. And I can say to you that even though I never thought I would be Dean until about 12 years ago, where I thought, you know what, I've been running the show for someone else, I think I can run the show myself, and I'd really like to try. So your own attitude and experiences change, and your own confidence levels change, and sometimes you do have to back yourself with, where it's reasonable to back yourself. Some of the other things that you've asked me, so the end point of that discussion is, it may not be linear. Be open to possibilities. Everything you do as you progressively start various jobs has something in it that prepares you and which you can use for the next. I am a far better Dean because of the other things I did, and that I can therefore bring to the deanship than if I hadn't done them. So someone once said, lives are lived forwards and understood backwards. And it's the same with careers. Let me address some of the other specific questions, and then I'll leave it to you to ask in general what you'd like to ask. One of the things that is asked in the questions is, areas of law that are going to be interesting, or from a career point of view, where are they going to, where is the action? So I want to use that to focus on a couple of things. One is experienced interviewers and employers are looking for authenticity. And so whatever narrative you're spinning, I don't mean that in a spinmeister sense, I mean that in we all tell stories and narratives about ourselves and others. Whatever your narrative is, it has to be honest, and it has to match the evidence. We teach you in law that you don't just make statements, you've got to have the evidence to back it up. Well, they're doing the same with your application. And so they're looking for evidence that what you say rings true. So if you say that you're really interested not just in commercial law and you're applying to a commercial law firm, and you're really interested in a certain area, but you've never done any electives in your degree which suggests that you're actually interested in that area, and you don't have any other experiences, then it's very hard to take you at your word. Well, they might take you at your word and say, well, yes, but there's a question mark about you. We don't know if you really are passionate. And so there's something about the authenticity of what you say and what you've done. So if you think you want to be doing a career with a certain kind of employer that works for in a certain kind of industry and for certain kinds of clients, then there are things you can do in your choice of electives or in volunteerships, including with our own clinics while you're here. We do clinics in family law, we do clinics that do things on a whole range of things. You can do things while you are doing a JD or a Masters that help you tell an honest story about what kind of career you actually are interested in and why you would be applying to them and why you're starting there. And to use an extreme example, if you're applying to let's say you're applying to an NGO or you're applying to the Australian Human Rights Commission, you say, look, my burning desire my whole life has been to be involved in policy work and law reform work and commitment to human rights, and all your electives are in commercial law and all of your other experiences at university are in corporate and commercial law, and your best grades are in that, not in constitutional law and not anything. Someone might look at your application and go, well, those are great results and those are great experiences and all of that's translatable, but to the extent that we're looking for people who are passionate in human rights, you're not number one, because the evidence doesn't suggest that. Okay? So think about authenticity. Significant growth in coming years. There's no two ways around it. You're going to have to be able to deal with AI-assisted legal advice. One of the debates going on is about whether or not you need to be, whether you need to be able to do source code as a law graduate. I don't believe you do. But there are lots and lots of examples already surfacing whereby AI-assisted advice and AI-designed stuff comes into the legal domain of advice and transactions. So you're going to need to know enough about how AI-assisted analysis works to be able to interrogate it if you're in litigation, to be able to instruct it if you're going to be using it in your job, and to be savvy enough with it. Just as you have to know enough about a particular client area, an industry area you're in, to really understand the context in which your clients are operating. But AI-assisted analysis is something you're going to have to become familiar with that you wouldn't have had to become familiar with 5 years ago. And of course, it's going to exponentially increase and take over a lot of practice. I don't mean as in replacing lawyers. I mean you won't be able to avoid it. There are various. It's hard to predict with a crystal ball. What's the key areas? It's clear that for many law firms, commercial law firms anyway, regulatory investigations has become an emerging area of practice in its own right. There's lots and lots of stuff going on where there's more regulation and more official regulators and more investigations and more enforcement and more evidence-based stuff around. AI-assisted analysis comes in there as well. So clearly regulatory investigations is a good area. There are some areas that everyone's looking at because they're popular, areas in careers in sustainability and how that relates to law firms, professional accounting firms. One of my areas is corporate social responsibility and environmental, social and governance considerations, CSR and ESG, as it relates to corporate investment decision making. Well, that's all the rage, and there's debates going on about how far those sorts of things should be regulated. So clearly there are areas that come and go. There was a time when IT and IP was the gun area, but 5 years later it changed. So most of the broad areas of practice, at least with it from a commercial point of view, are going to be necessary. There's always going to be a need for family law and family law mediation because relationships break down and there are children. So it's very hard to think about areas that are going to go out of fashion. Some wax in and wax out, and there are some emerging areas such as the regulatory investigations, and there are, more importantly, things you need to do as a graduate to equip yourself in the era of AI to be able to operate in that environment, because your clients will be. I might pause there. I may only have tipped the touch to the side of the bucket on some of the questions, but I did try to bring some of them into my opening comments. So can I pause there and invite an open Q&A? How should we do this? From here or?
I'll introduce Eric.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
Sure.
So most of you met already. We also have Eric, who is a senior lecturer in the Faculty of Law at Monash University, course director of JD, and associate with its Center for Commercial Law and Regulatory Studies, and a fellow of the Australian Centre for Justice Innovation. So guys, please welcome Eric.
So who would like to kick off with a question from the audience? There are no silly questions. When it's about something to do with careers, we're all learning, even me. I'm going to stop being Dean at the end of next week and I've got to take on something else. So we're all still learning. Ancora imparo, as the motto of Monash University goes. We're all still learning. So we're learning today about careers. Yes?
Hi. Thank you for this question time. I would just like to ask, how would one get into prosecutorial services from a JD perspective? What would be the best pathway of doing that?
So It starts with, and criminal law is not one of my areas, but and I haven't worked as a prosecutor, but we've got a lot of people who have gone off on that path. So you've got state criminal side, you've got Commonwealth DPP. So you've got state and Commonwealth. So you've immediately got two possibilities open. There will be, in the careers guide produced by the LSS, information from employers who are in prosecutions. There are networking events to do with criminal law enforcement investigations. Some of that new wave of investigations that I mentioned earlier as a new and developing area of practice cuts across the criminal domain, because there are some areas of law where, for example, when it comes to competition, cartel behaviour, which is criminal activity, is now relevant in terms of things that come before law firms. So there's a crossover in areas of law. Don't just think in terms of just commercial and just criminal. But it starts with those LSS events when there's someone from the DPP who's coming along. They will often advertise and I think take positions as well before you've graduated, or at least expose you to some experiences. So I would take advantage of all the opportunities to find out as much as you can on the state and Commonwealth DPP side. Talk to people who have recent graduates from here, talk to the LSS who have gone there, who have done criminal work. There are many barristers who go to the criminal bar, so talk to them about what it's like to work for a prosecutor's office, and gather as much intel as you can and then triangulate. Eric, do you have anything to say there?
Look, first of all, it's good to be here. There's lots of familiar faces, so that's always great. Just a couple of things to add to that. Both at the Commonwealth and the Victorian level, there is a state government solicitor's office. Victorian state government solicitors at Commonwealth, they offer traineeships, and that's often a feeding ground into prosecutorial services. If you're looking at law firms, and you're looking to, as Bryan said, all of this is about information gathering and looking at the options and the possibilities. There are law firms that specialise in defence work, and it's not uncommon for defendant lawyers to transition to prosecutorial, whether that's white collar crime or other forms of crime as well. So I would keep your eyes open for those possibilities as well.
I might add something to that. And also there are new job opportunities. So for example, in the criminal domain, we ran a conference, an Australasian jury technology conference in our moot court at Clayton a couple of years ago. And the then Victorian DPP brought along one of her employees, and that employee was a recent law graduate, and they had a job title that I'd never heard before and which did not exist until a few years ago, and that was jury technologist. And their job was to work in the DPP and to help in court matters, helping the lawyers on both sides and the judge and the judge's associate and the jury to deal with technological evidence. And so everything was being done electronically, and everybody needed to be trained in it. Photos, not photo books, but images produced technologically. So again, there are new jobs emerging across a whole range of areas of law, even in the criminal law space. Who else would like to ask something?
Hi, I'm Peak. I'm a first year Master of Law student. Can you suggest some job or career that can I attend for my job experience right now? I mean.
So jobs to do right now?
Yeah, for law related jobs.
Okay. So are you a full-time Master of Law student? Okay.
Full-time, just starting this year.
Okay. So again, and depending on where you want to go, whether it's a law firm, NGO, somewhere else, there are paralegal jobs that law firms and other organisations will have. So you're there working on matters, including matters that might go to litigation. You might work a couple of days a week, but you're in a law firm. Barristers will sometimes use some students to do some background research for them. So they will employ students part-time to do that, knowing that they're otherwise doing full-time study.
Okay. And those doesn't require the license here, right?
So doing those things, you're not acting as a lawyer. So provided you're not giving advice as a lawyer or practicing as a lawyer, there are some things you can do. Paralegals and clerks are not admitted as lawyers yet, so they're not able to give advice, but they can still work inside a law firm. You might become a research assistant to an academic in a certain area of law, because the thing about a master's degree is that whatever you're going to do with it, you're saying to an employer, if you're using it for career purposes, and you might be doing it to pursue an area of interest, but also for a career, what you're saying to an employer is, I have advanced study in certain areas that matter to you and the work you do. And I have this aptitude, and I've got these other experiences.
Can I say that's probably the most frequent question I get asked, and the reality is, as Bryan mentioned, there are 8 law schools in Melbourne, and there are 8 sets of students who are out there looking to get this first paralegal job or a job in a legal environment. So my suggestion is to think laterally, and Bryan mentioned before about dispelling assumptions. Think laterally. There's a whole range of people who would benefit from your skills other than the traditional legal pathways. There's a whole range of community not-for-profit organisations that would love to benefit from your skills. They may not be able to pay a lot, but they're there. There's a whole range of government agencies. Bryan mentioned before regulatory investigations being an increasingly prominent area, and indeed that's an area for criminal experience as well, because the regulatory investigation, if successful, will lead to a regulatory prosecution, and they are criminal prosecutions. So there are a whole range of government agencies. One area that I research in is sports law, and sporting organisations right now are under incredibly high and increasing levels of scrutiny about their integrity, both in terms of competition and how they treat people and how they treat their members and protect people, and they are always looking for people with paralegal type experiences to help them administer their integrity processes. So I'd encourage you to think laterally as well about the range of opportunities.
Thank you so much.
And also sometimes students can worry about, well, does it have to be legal experience? Okay, so those other transferable skills and experiences are found not only through legal jobs that you might be doing while you're a student and a JD or an LM student. So what matters is the skill and experience, and is it transferable to a legal context once you finish your LLM and you apply for whatever legal job or non-legal job you're after. One of the other questions that was asked in the questions I noticed was about, well, you know, what if you've got full-time caring responsibilities, you've got significant study you're doing, whether it's full-time or part-time, but you're juggling a lot and you can't necessarily go off and do clerkships. You know, what do you do? So again, there's some things you can't control and there's some things you can control. It is the fact that the most common way for law firms to take new law graduates is via a penultimate year clerkship, where they get to check what you're like, they get to vet you first and decide whether they want you or not, and then they see what you like in the workplace and then offer you a job. But these days there are more and more organisations, including law firms, that will look at you if you haven't gone via the clerkship route, and they will take applications for you first year out. But there's got to be a reason and something in the application that makes them go, well, this person has the grades and the skill set that we need to do. And so somebody who hasn't been able to, for whatever reason, take advantage of a clerkship, you have other opportunities, and you are not precluded from getting even those jobs, but you just have to find your way through it. And you know, there are issues about, well, you know, the clerkships aren't always on the same time, they're convenient for my program, but Eric can speak to how JD students have addressed that, and so Eric, that's probably something useful for everybody to know as well.
Just by way of context, the larger firms, the medium to large firms, will run what they call summer and winter clerkships. They will take people on for 2, 3, I think 3 weeks is the most that they do, but they take you on for 2 or 3 weeks. They take 2 or 3 rounds every winter, they take 2 or 3 rounds every summer. They then have a pool of 60 or so students or trainee lawyers whom they've experienced in their offices, and that will be a pool of people that have a head start in the job process when you go for traineeships. Most of the firms will be looking for JD students towards the end of their second full-time year of study. And at that point, you're also now starting to do your electives. And most of our electives are taught in intensive or semi-intensive formats, which enable you now to timetable your studies to create the space to do the clerkships. I do know that the firms that do offer the clerkships do understand that maybe in that first week that the clerkship starts, some students might still have an exam, particularly if you're unfortunate enough for your exam to be scheduled right at the end of the period. And I have not heard of one law firm that has not been accommodating to that situation. So it's a matter though of, and Bryan mentioned this a number of times, it's about taking ownership of your own course and planning your course and thinking ahead as to what you want to do, because you want to timetable your electives to create the space to do the clerkships, but you're going to have other opportunities to do placements, to study overseas, take ownership of your degree, start planning your degree.
What Eric was speaking about there also reminded me of something else, which is whether you're going to work as a paralegal or a clerk or a first year graduate, and whatever the job, but I'll pick law firm as a generic law firm as an example. When you get there, all the others that are a year ahead of you, or those who are already there if you're a clerk, they all seem as though they're so super confident and super competent as well. They're not. They've just been there longer. And 6 months or 12 months can make a difference. The first time you do something in practice, I was in my late 20s, I had this doctorate from Oxford, but I'm starting work in banking and finance, and my first matter took me, more than a day to do, and the executive assistant came in and addressed me as Dr. Horrigan. I only got addressed as Dr. Horrigan in the law firm when someone was about to say something not nice to me. And so she walked in and said, "Do we know how to fill out a form F39, Dr. Horrigan?" I think not. So she was sort of, giving me a bit of attitude as well. And it took me more than a day to do the thing the first time. Second one I did took me half a day. Third one took me an hour or two. And by the fourth one I was saying to the partner, "Can you give me something more challenging to do?" So you'll be like that. And they're putting up faces as well. So I mention this because many students, both as students and in working, many academics fall prey to imposter syndrome and thinking, when am I going to be found out that I'm not really up to it? And of course, when you're starting off with a place and you see all these other supposedly confident, competent people around, you worry about it. But you shouldn't, because it's just experience and time in the job. And I'm going to add to that by saying, because I've had a lot of experience where somebody is dealing with a law firm partner. They want to make a good impression, and so they don't ask the questions they should ask. And they go away and they think they've understood what they've just been asked to do, but they've never done one of those before, and they spend a whole heap more time on it. When they come back, the partner looks at it and goes, "This is not what I asked for." So at all times when you're doing these jobs, whether you're a paralegal, whether you're a clerk, whether you're a first year graduate or beyond, one of the things is to work out how do I show the reality of I don't have as much knowledge about an area of law or practice or about this particular client or about these sort of things as an instructing partner, and partners are busy. And they don't know what you don't know unless you tell them what you don't know. So one of the things that I urge, and I trained a lot of graduates in this in client-focused research and advice when I was working in a law firm, one of the things I train them is you've got to have a method that shows that you are mature and that you are getting it and that you are focused on what the partner's going to need. So, for example, if they're just speaking at you quickly and you haven't received the instructions by email or so on, and you're not going to have time, if you say to a busy partner, could you send me an email? They're just going to look at you and go, "You millennial?" No. So you've got to make sure that they understand you've squeezed all the value out of that interaction. And so one of the ways you can do that is to show that what you've understood and what you haven't understood is by, if I just use some words, "Thank you for that. I've never done one of these before, so I just want to check that I've got it right so I don't waste your time and I give you what you need for the client. So I can check my understanding. We're dealing with a situation A, B, C, D, and the issues you want me to look at are M, N, O, P, and in particular you're concerned about X, Y, Z. Have I got that right?" And you'd be surprised how often, and even when I've done this, and I'm pretty experienced at it, how often, just because of the nature of communication, and you don't learn everything all at once, we understand things in waves, especially when there's a gap between what you know and understand and what the instructing person does. They could be an instructing prosecutor, they could be someone in legal aid, they could be a law firm partner. Same issue, could be a barrister. But under the pressure of time, they may not have explained it perfectly, or you may not have got it all in one go. And that shows you that I am listening, I am processing this, I'm letting you know what I do and don't know, what's in my experience, I'm not wasting your time, but I'm checking whether I've got it. And you'd be surprised how often they say, that's not quite right. Okay? But unless you find a way to speak up, your choice is, do you speak up in a way that shows that you are an intelligent, mature employee trying to get to what the partner needs to deliver for the client in the most effective and timely way possible? You either speak up in the right way, or you go away and try and work it out. No one else is going to be able to tell you, trust me, after having been 20 years in practice, no one else will know, because they weren't in the room, what the partner said. No one else will know exactly the nuances of the instructions, even if they've worked on one of these before. You perhaps should talk to them to sort of work out, how do these things go? What do I need to look out for? But they won't be able to help you. And so if you choose not to ask or show what you do or don't know about the instructions, then you'll have problems. And similarly, because the partner will say to you, or the work giver will say to you, well, this is not what I asked for. You've wasted valuable time and I can't charge the client for that. And then it's, well, what do I do if you go away and you realise you're not finding anything? Could be a research task, could be a bit of research and document preparation. Again, you've got to find a way to come back to them to get a steer. And so in the past, I've done things like go back to a partner, and you always want to know the deadline. Whether you're there as a paralegal or whether you've been there for a year, you want to know what the deadline is. And if you say, what's the deadline, they'll say to you, yesterday. So you want to ask intelligent questions like, when does the client need this? Or when are you meeting with the client? Because that's the real deadline. And if you know the deadline and you've done the best you can go back to them and say, look, you asked me to look at 1, 2 and 3. Before I sort of put it in a note back to you for the client meeting tomorrow, on 1, I'm pretty sure the answer is this. On 2, I'm almost there, but I think the answer is this. 3, I haven't got there yet. Do you want me to, do you want me to pursue that or not? Because again, things can change. And you'd be surprised again how often a partner might say to you, actually, you've done enough to make me aware that we've probably got a problem, because 1 and 2 are what's really worrying me. I'm not so concerned about 3, so if you haven't got to it, don't worry about it. So there's a whole heap of things to learn, and this is not a session about how do you manage work givers and supervisors and law firm partners. But it is part of your thinking about, at the end of the day, when you go into a place, especially when you're new or you're only there for a short period of time, 2 or 3 weeks as a clerk, as Eric has said, or just starting off, impressions are being formed, and you need to find a way to present as a mature professional who doesn't have to know everything and who hasn't experienced everything and who is not expected to be as good as the person giving them the work. But if you give in to imposter syndrome or the fear of imposter syndrome and you try to work it out yourself when you haven't understood at the instructions phase, it's a recipe for more harm. So think about and develop ways while you're here in being able to speak up in a way which is confident, but which is saying. There's no shame in saying, especially when you're new or a clerk or a first year graduate or even beyond that, there's no shame in saying to a partner, I've never worked in this area before. Because that's the trigger. They may want to spend time and say, oh, okay, let me explain how these things work. Well, they might say, I don't have time, but go and talk to Jill. She's worked on another one of these. But you've got to give them signals, because they're giving you instructions. They're the ones who are on the line for it with the client. You've got to deliver on the time that they need it, or go back to them if you're not going to go give them what they need in the time they asked. You've got to keep them in control. Don't press the control buttons of a busy, time poor, type A personality, senior lawyer. I've seen it happen, and I've seen the consequences. So I offer you that advice as part of develop experiences now where you get used to, in an honest and mature way, saying, look, I haven't done these before, or I didn't quite get that. Can I just check my understanding? That is showing someone that you are doing the right thing. You've got to get into that mode as well, even when you're doing clerkships. Okay, more questions? We've got about 5 minutes left.
Hi there, I'm Hamish, third trimester Juris Doctor student. I've got aspirations to either study or practice overseas, potentially at Oxford through the Pathways program or in the UK in some other capacity. And I was wondering if either of you had some advice as to how a student at Monash might go about setting themselves up to have success in international practice or study in general.
So they're two different things, international practice and study, but one can lead to the other. We have the pathways with Oxford and Cambridge. For JD students, you have both Oxford and Cambridge and also King's College London available to you on the pathway. You have to meet their academic standards. So again, we're back to you maximise your chance of getting in there by getting the best grades you possibly can, and they assess whether you're up to it or not. We help with, by having had the pathway. I was the dean that negotiated the pathway, and the advantage for you is you get to, if you get to double credit subjects that you do in the master's program there, that helps you complete the electives to finish your degree here. You could end up starting with a law firm mid-year, and you've come out with you know two graduate degrees from two great law schools. So there's an advantage in doing it. We have some scholarships, limited number of scholarships we provide to people to go there. There are other scholarships available if financing is the issue. There are any number of other scholarships, John Monash scholarships, Rhodes scholarships, others provided by other parties that will help fund this. Again, the master's level qualification, depending on the choice of subjects, can then position you to apply to an employer internationally, saying, well, I've now done comparative international law in this, and I got this grade from doing the Master of Law and Finance at Oxford or the LLM at Cambridge, which of course are prestigious degrees, and if you've got good grades, then you are employable. So those are some of the starting things I would indicate. And talk to those who've gone from here and done it before and get some tips from them about it and the kinds of jobs they've done. And again, you'll find when you go to a place like Oxford or Cambridge or any of these others, London or North America or elsewhere, the international career opportunities are available on campus because those employers are coming and looking for the employees they want. And so if you're located there, it's a matter of taking advantage of those career seminars that go on as well.
I don't have a lot to add other than there's a lot of resources on the web, study abroad opportunities. In terms of, I guess, international career, that's probably one or two steps on. Just by way of background, I was fortunate enough, I've lived and worked in Hong Kong, I've lived and worked in New York. What I would say though is, and reinforce something Bryan said earlier, is the Monash degree is incredibly portable and it opens up doors. Monash in particular, but I think Australian law schools generally are well viewed overseas, and it really does set you up.
Maybe one last question, and then we'll close. So,
Hi, my name is Fee. Thank you to have a talk and experience today. So I'm an international student, and I want to have an advice on how to really start my legal career here in Australia after graduate, because the policy has changed, and we can only have 2 years to find a job here in Australia after graduate. And I really want to practice law in Australia, so I really want to get an advice on that. Thank you.
So apart from immigration aspects and other aspects of being an international student, everything that Eric and I have been talking about in terms of what gets you in the door as a first-year graduate of this university with a JD degree, if you want to work in Australia, particularly in law, then the same advice applies, which is build the network starting here. You know, there's an LSS network to join. There's a mentoring network where law firms will send people to events that we're holding, some in this very room. So go to those events, talk to people, build the network here, find out about the different kinds of legal employers that are out there that are in areas you want to do. Get the best grades that you can. Think about your choice of electives to show an employer, I am really interested in this area and I do very well at it, so that you maximise their interest in you. I think most of the things we're talking about are applicable across whether you are an international student or a domestic student.
So is it common for an Australian law firm to sponsor you as a foreigner to work for your law firm because I'm not an Australian?
So those are issues that are too discrete, I think, to deal with here. It's different at different law firms. So that's a question to pursue with particular law firms. But I think we have guidance that we give to students about this as well.
Again, there is a lot of guidance on the website. There's also the Monash International Students Association. What I would say though is that the experience I've heard from students is that law firms sponsoring international students, there is an expense involved and there is a level of bureaucracy involved. And it does come back to Brian's question. It does come down to grades. If they're going to do that, you have to show them that you've earned it. That there's something about you worthy of investing in you over and above an investment that they would make in a domestic student. And that is the reality of the international student situation.
Thank you.
And in that, it may also be a strategic choice by you. If, for example, you've got other cultural experiences, you've got lived experience in other jurisdictions, if you have other languages that you can speak, then for an international law firm that has offices in a number of European, Asian and Australian places, then there may well be a reason why they're looking at an international student who has things that some of the domestic students may not. But without the grades, as Erica said, and as I indicated earlier, they're not going to be looking at you, but you may have things to bring to the table that they are interested in. But it's always going to be a cost, it's always going to be a process, and it's just an extra factor that is not there when they're employing domestic people. But they're looking for employers that can work in various offices, remember. So you might start in Australia, but ultimately they may look at you as someone, and you may be saying, look, I'd really like to go back and work in wherever. Okay, so it's a number of factors in play.
Great. Thank you so much, Bryan and Eric. Let's give a round of applause for the time.
Thank you. Thank you.